Starting with the preseason favorite Georgia, starting off the season hot, emerging as the apparent top dog after their Week 1 second-half dominance against Clemson. And speaking of another preseason favorite, Texas and Sarkisian's high-powered offense has been humming, beating defending champs Michigan 31-12 in the Big House just a few weeks ago. And Arch Manning stepping up the past 2 weeks exactly, helping the Longhorns stay in the top 3. And Josh Heupel's Vols have been lighting up the scoreboards, boasting the nation's third highest point margin, paving their way into the top 5 on the AP poll. But will we see them take the poll's best spot this season? We shall see. And after a roller coaster matchup against the Bulldogs, Alabama stamped themselves as one of the best teams in the nation, securing the first spot in the AP poll for the first time in the Kalen DeBoer era. And let's take a look at this week's college football rankings brought to you by Prudential. Now, Alabama claims the top spot, the third SEC team to do so this season after beating Georgia, while the Dogs drop from 2nd to 5th. Tennessee cracks the top 5, while Michigan sneaks into the top 10, and Miami is the ACC's sole representative in Week 6. Now, we saw so much of a shakeup in the SEC in the first month alone. Lugs, who would you put at the top of the class of the SEC?
Well, right now, I think it's clearly Alabama, because I don't see anybody that has the answers to their offensive formula right now. You could make an argument that from a personnel standpoint, Georgia was best equipped. But when you have essentially a running back playing quarterback who can throw it and can create vertical plays, it puts the defense in such a pickle, because if you start to make choices to load the box to defend quarterback run, you're now leaving Ryan Williams out there one-on-one, which is a complete and utter mismatch. So I don't know what the formula is if you don't have equal personnel to defend Alabama and keep the score down. So for me, they're clearly the class of the league right now.
And Luke, I got to make one correction. You said a running back playing quarterback, talking about Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is a quarterback who's got legs. He wasn't, remember, and you know this more than anybody, coming out of high school, he wasn't one of these top recruited dual threat quarterbacks. He was a pocket passer, but he also has legs. That's what makes him so hard to stop. Now, to that point, I will say that Alabama is at the head of the SEC, but it's not so obvious. I think Texas is another team that people need to keep an eye out. Of course, you have a bye week this week, so you're not playing, but Texas has the talent offensively. They're playing a lot better defensively, and so these two teams, in my opinion, are the two best teams in the SEC.
Now, Lugs, how many teams do you think you could see from the SEC in the CFP?
Well, if we're going to look at the top upper echelon, we just showed the AP poll. Clearly, Tennessee's in the mix. Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss just had a difficult loss. We'll see how teams like Texas continue to unfold. So you're looking at a minimum of probably 4, but the league by and large hasn't quite yet had an opportunity to cannibalize itself. That was just an appetizer that we saw on Saturday, because you take a look at Georgia, they still got Texas, Tennessee left on the map, as well as Ole Miss. You consider Ole Miss, I think the early portion of their schedule did them no favors, guys. They weren't challenged. They did not have to deal with any type of adversity. It looked easy. It felt easy, and they kind of went on cruise control. And now you look at the remainder of their schedule, and this is a resurgent Arkansas team. You're on the road in one of the most difficult places to play at LSU, and you've got Georgia at Florida, and then the rivalry in the Egg Bowl late. And so I hope the loss to Kentucky, which was one they were not circling as a loss, was a real wake-up call for the gauntlet that is coming if you're Ole Miss.
And speaking of gauntlet, we need to throw up Tennessee's schedule. I'm not sure if we have it. If we don't, I'll just talk about it. Tennessee, they're going to host Alabama. Then they go to Athens and they play Georgia. And oh, by the way, in the middle of that, they play Kentucky, a team in Kentucky who not only beat Ole Miss, but they took Georgia down to the wire. And so, yes, I still think that 4 teams from the SEC are going to make the college football playoff. But a team like Tennessee, this media darling, a team that's playing really good football, they could have some bumps in the road, talking about Alabama the way that they're looking, Georgia the way they're looking, and then Kentucky the way they've played as of late. Could be 3 big bumps for Tennessee, and it could prove difficult for them to make it if they end up losing one more outside of that.
Who or what was the biggest surprise of September for you?
Well, I think that there were a couple of teams. Number one, I look at Pitt, obviously. I think that they're a football team that's been a wonderful surprise with Eli Holstein coming through the transfer portal. They've had 2 come-from-behind victories, 1 in a rivalry game in the backyard brawl versus West Virginia. They've got arguably one of the best transfer portal additions in all of college football out of FCS Western Carolina in Desmond Reed. But it's really been about Eli Holstein. His ability through the air and on the ground for a guy that was a redshirt freshman a year ago at Alabama. He's playing like a seasoned veteran, and they're able to score points at a really rapid clip. So I've been unbelievably impressed with them.
And the reason, yes, quarterback Eli Holstein, but just a quick tag to that, their offensive coordinator, Cade Bell, he was at the FCS level, Western Carolina, and you know this as well, Lugs. He was putting up huge numbers there, so that's a great addition as well. But my team that surprised me the most is BYU. In all the talk about the Big 12 and who's going to win, is it going to be Oklahoma State? Is it going to be Kansas State? BYU is 5-0, and one of those wins is against Kansas State. A team that a lot of people, forget people. I thought Kansas State was going to win the Big 12. And yes, it's still early in the season, but BYU is playing really, really good football. They've already been challenged. Now they will be tested as the season progresses, but I'm extremely surprised at their early success based off of some of their struggles in the past.
Sam, I'll give you another one. I've been really impressed so far with Indiana, Kurt Cignetti in year 1. Now, listen, haven't exactly had the most daunting schedule. Maryland was the best team that they've played to this point. But they, too, have a fantastic roster addition through the portal in quarterback Curtis Rourke. Had an opportunity to broadcast 3 of his games at Ohio over the last couple of years. He is really, really talented. #1 scoring offense in the Big Ten. Top 5 rush and pass offense. The schedule's going to get meatier, but Indiana looks to be for real.
Well, and Lugs, Pitt can make some history this Saturday. If they get their 5th win, it'll be the first time since 1991 that they're starting 5-0. So we're on Team Pitt over here. All right, let's keep moving to some not so great surprise over here. All right, the defending ACC champs not looking like championship material starting the season, 1-4, and now there's more bad news. They'll be without starting QB DJ Uiagalelei, who broke a finger on his throwing hand during Saturday's loss to SMU. He's expected to miss the next few weeks, and a clear timeline will come after further evaluation. Brock Glenn will start Saturday against Clemson. So shifting from disappointments onto disappointing teams, Sam, who would you say is your most disappointing team after a first month?
Yeah, there's no shift. You got to stick with Florida State. You saw disappointments to disappointments to disappointments. I got a chance to broadcast one of Florida State's games a few weeks ago, and it wasn't just the quarterback position, DJ Uiagalelei, that struggled. It was also the run game that struggled. Their defense has been up and down. Early in the season, we saw them struggle, giving up a few hundred rushing yards, and they got better. Then all of a sudden, you go to the SMU game, and they're throwing interception after interception after interception. And it wasn't just misplaced passes. You're seeing a lot of drops, a lot of missed tackles, at least in the past with their defense. And so for me, Florida State has been the most disappointing team just because there's so much talent on that team, and they've gotten some pieces back. Offensive coordinator Alex Atkins came back, well, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, and they're still not competing at the level you would expect from a premier program.
I must have misunderstood the assignment because I assumed that FSU was the given answer there, so I got to go somewhere else. And I'm going to go to the Big 12 with the Kansas Jayhawks. I think Lance Leipold thought he had himself a real opportunity with this football team. They lose Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State, the offensive coordinator. You bring in Jeff Grimes. And, guys, Kansas can't throw the football. They're completing 53% of their passes. They've turned the ball over 8 times through the air. Jalen Daniels is a shell of himself. Now, they can run it, all right, but they have no ability to move the ball through the air. They've had some self-inflicted wounds. I think they've been really disappointing when you look at who they had coming back on their roster.
But to your point, Lugs, look at who they lost. They lost Andy Kotelnicki, who's a brilliant offensive coordinator at Penn State, now doing great things. Now, the last team I'll say that has been a disappointment is Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech is another team that I got a chance to cover early in the season. And mainly it's just because of not only the preseason hype, but once again, the talent on this roster. Kyron Drones, Bayshaw Tootin, these guys are premier players. Jalen Lane at receiver. When we broadcast their game, there were multiple NFL scouts looking at almost everyone on their roster. and yet for whatever reason, they have not been able to put it together. Now, you could blame some of that on special teams. There have been some special teams mistakes. Some may call them disasters, but I think Virginia Tech is a team that a lot of people had high hopes for, and those hopes are dwindling, flailing, and falling as we speak.
I might